Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another edition of Navigate with HSBC. This afternoon is another very interesting afternoon because of our speaker. This afternoon is an eclectic personality. He is an investment fund manager. He had a fabulous career outside of India, but chose to come back to India and start on his own. He is an author and obviously, in many ways, a star of the investment management world. Please join me in welcoming Saurav Mukherjee from Marcellus as part of our conversation for this afternoon. Saurav, welcome and thank you for making time.
Well, thank you, Shoival. The privilege being here. Looking forward to this discussion with you.
So, Saurav, so how do you manage anyway? Investment manager, and you are an author, and you are a TED speaker. All of these things together. How do you do all this?
I think part of it is that the years of growing up in the UK, right, and being drilled in school how to write long essays. So that habit stayed of writing, but also my parents, most of my family still lives abroad. So there's lot of toing and froing between India and the Western world, both to meet clients and family. And on long haul flights, there's only so many movies you can watch. After that, you start writing books on long haul flights. So and it's been now 17 years and six books, almost all written on flights. And it's good fun. It's good fun. You get to see the world, and you get to do an interesting job. I feel very privileged that I can live in India, write about the Indian markets, and still earn a good living.
Super. So, sort of, we will dive deep dive into the questions right now. We obviously have reached out to a number of our colleagues and some of our customers to
Hmm.
for getting you cornered this afternoon. So we're going to ask you a lot of questions about your investment ideas, about your product, and of course, more importantly, I think about global investing and the global market in that sense. I think, and my first question really is about that. I think Indians traditionally have a very large bias towards the Indian market. I remember that's what you and I were talking about when we were visiting our office.
Hmm.
So we obviously have a big bias towards Indian market. In that context, why is global diversification even important for an Indian investor? And of course, in that context, do tell us a bit about your own views about what the global and the US market especially looks like.
So look, I think it's not just Indians. Shoaib, even Americans have a home country bias. It is but natural. It is but natural to have a home country bias. Whatever you know best, जो आपको सबसे ज़्यादा समझ आता है, you will gravitate towards that. But let me set up a different mental model. So I'm actually now in England. I'm at my parents' place in England, and I'm hoping to watch the first test between India and England. Right now, put yourself in the shoes of the Indian selectors. Put yourself in the shoes of Mr. Ajit Agarkar. He has to select the Indian cricket team. So will he say, "Nahi, yaar, I'll just select boys from South Bombay," or will he say, "I'll just select boys from Bombay"? I don't think he'll do that, right? Nor will he say, "I'll just select players from West Zone," right? A selector will say, "Let's pool the best talent. Let's pull in the best talent we can from all parts of India, whether that cricketer is from Mizoram or Mumbai is irrelevant. The Indian cricket team selector wants the 11 best cricketers on the field playing against England, right? Similarly, if you watch European Champions League, right? So I've been an avid soccer fan for many years. If you watch the European Champions League, you'll see almost all the top teams, Shoaib, all the top teams, they contain players from all over the world. And this includes Spanish teams and Italian teams and German teams, right? Unka khud ke country mein, they've got formidable talent, but they realize, the
Yet,
Spanish team realizes that if I pull in best players, Brazilians le aata hu, kuch English players le aata hu, I'll create a stronger team, right? So similarly for equity portfolios, right? Just because I live in Mumbai doesn't mean that I shouldn't have the world's best stocks in my portfolio. I should absolutely have the world's best stocks in my portfolio. Now, the question then is, if I'm an equity investor in India, right? So if I'm an equity investor in say Bangalore, right? Where are the world's best stocks? Are they all in India or are they in various countries? So I'll just beam up a little bit of data because data is always useful in the context of the stock market.
sure. Yeah.
So so you'll shortly see the table coming up, right? I've put up on the screen total shareholder returns. These are all dollar returns, folks. Those of you watching, these are all dollar returns over 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years. And the message that I take away from this table is there are only two markets in the world, only two markets which can deliver double-digit dollar returns over 10 and 20 years, right? Which is India and America. I know Taiwan also features. If you see middle of the table. Taiwan's also there, but Taiwan is effectively one stock. And thankfully, it's a stock we're invested in. It's TSMC. Taiwan effectively is part of the American market only, right? So effectively, India and America are the only two markets which give you double-digit dollar compounding over 10 and 20 years. I would submit to you a lot of it, Shwebal, is because these are giant free market economies, right? That's one of the magical things. Giant free market, democratic economies. Now, the beautiful thing is if you pick American stocks in your portfolio, right, not only do you get the strong returns that you see over those 10 and 20-year horizons, returns which are comparable to India, but you also get diversification, right? India ka market and America ka market have low correlation. Low correlation matlab when they have elections, we don't have elections. Our election cycle is different to America. When they have financial crises, we don't have financial crises. Our financial crises happen at a different time to American financial crises. The structure of the American economy, high tech, a big Wall Street presence, big technology presence, structure of the American economy is very different to the Indian economy. So as economists, right, we use this term correlation. Correlation मतलब कितना तालमेल है यूएस और इंडिया के बीच. The answer is amongst the world's big markets, India and America have very little talmel, केवल 40%, just 40% correlation between India and America. So if you have India and America, not only do you get double engine compounding, the two strongest markets in the world firing for you, not only do you get that, you also get diversification. रात को नींद बेहतर आती है, portfolio volatility कम हो जाता है, right? So just like in Champions League football, or just like in elite cricket, right? Think of an IPL team. It'll deliberately pull in the best players from around the world. Similarly in investing, right? Similarly in investing, global diversification करने के compelling reasons हैं, and diversifying into America, given that it's the world's best performing market over 1 year or 10 years, right? That there's significant gap between India and America and the rest of the world. And therefore diversifying between these two markets makes a lot of sense. Just buying Indian stocks, I think is missing half the story. Other half of the story is the world's best compounders. Slam them into your portfolio, drive better compounding. Shoaib, you're on mute, sir.
Sort of in this one chart, you actually end up answering all the three questions, right? So you're really talking about diversification as a story. You talk about how, unlike what we believe, there are other markets which are performing perhaps the same momentum, if not better than India as well. And the case for, of course, looking at opportunity across markets rather than looking at a single one. So that is an interesting perspective. And tell us, so it's good to talk about the fact that investors should diversify. But when you look at global markets, what are the different ways that investors can achieve this? Of course, it doesn't seem to be plausible for investors to really look at stocks globally and then invest and then also match it to their portfolios here. So, what are the different ways in which they can possibly achieve this?
So, so let me, before I go on to that, let me also raise another dimension of what complicates life for folks like me in India. And I suspect many of your clients in HSBC are in that same bucket. What complicates life for us in India, right, is even though we live in India and earn in rupees, Shoibal, a big chunk of our spending is in dollars, right? So not just, even if even if you don't send your kids to study in American universities or British universities, right? I think Donald Trump is trying his level best to make sure we don't send our kids to America. Even if you don't do that, if you sit in India and take a domestic flight, right? The plane will be imported, the crude oil will be imported, right? If you watch Netflix or you order pizza in India or you buy nice clothes, right? You're effectively doing dollar spend, right? For example, my iPhone, I bought it in Mumbai. It's an Indian made iPhone. I'm very proud of this. I show this to all my clients around the world. It's made in Hosur in Bangalore. But even though the iPhone is made in India, 80% of the iPhone is imported, right? The chip comes from our investee company in Taiwan, TSMC. उस chip के ऊपर lithography, the circuits on the chip come from another investee companies of ours called ASML. 80% of the components of my iPhone come from abroad. So what I figured out is for the people who are watching this webinar, at least a third, in my case, more like 50-60% of my expenditure is in dollars. So अगर मेरी सारी कमाई, all my earnings are in rupees, but a big chunk of my expenditure is in dollars, that's called asset liability mismatch, right? So it makes sense from leaving aside returns, leaving aside diversification. It also makes sense for you to invest in dollars. Now, this creates a further problem, right? The RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, allows all of us to only spend $250,000 a year abroad, right? So whether you spend it on holidays in Europe or on buying electronics in Dubai, the RBI says, boss, I don't care. The max you can spend abroad in a given year is $250,000. Now, if you then move forward, right, and think about how global investing, most global funds ask for $1 million minimum investment. Right, that becomes highly impractical. As it is, LRS ka limit hai $250,000. Most of us use some of that $250,000 for holidays abroad or for lifestyle. So we don't really have, I mean, even if we had the money, courtesy RBI, LRS limitations, we can't really put in the minimum corpus required for a global investing product, right? And that's the context. That was the problem statement that we set out to solve 4 years ago, saying that we want to invest abroad, but we can't invest $1 million because of legal reasons. Furthermore, courtesy the rules of the Indian tax authorities, if you invest directly abroad, right, you don't go via GIFT City, आप सीधा विदेश चले जाते हो, your investments can attract very high capital gains tax rates, right? So maximum marginal rate applies to short-term capital gains in global investing. That ends up being 40%. So we said we want to invest abroad. We don't have $1 million. We don't want to pay crazy tax rates. So what can be done? And 3 years ago, we set out to solve that. And all credit, Shoibal, can't say this as many times as I should be. The Gift City folks were instrumental in helping us surmount all these hurdles. What they've built in Gift City is quite remarkable. It allows us Indians to invest abroad at attractive tax rates, at low cost, diversify globally, and we don't have to put up $1 million for that, right? So all of this has become very doable. By perforce, all of us in India have a big chunk of our spending in dollars. We need to save in dollars. Saving in dollars in a tax efficient, low cost way has become very doable thanks to Gift City. And kudos to the folks in Gift City for facilitating this.
No, I couldn't have agreed more. Sort of, thank you. I mean, thank you for calling out Gift City and the authority which runs it. I think we've been as a bank part of Gift City for about 4 or 5 years now, and
Right.
and I think they've been very very dynamic in terms of enabling us to really operate out of there. We run a large corporate bank business out of there, of foreign currency lending. We of course have started wealth as well, and that is how of course. You and your capability becomes so important for us. So indeed, I think Gift City has been a great experience. And now the next question comes in from a colleague of mine, and he's basically asked me to ask you that you apparently use a phrase called free lunch in diversification. So would want to understand from you, what does this phrase mean, and let our audience know what this is all about, really.
ठीक है. So I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm a middle-aged man who perpetually feels hungry. There is that, and anybody wants to give me a free lunch in a practical world, I'm always open for it. But let's discuss free lunch in the context of investing, right? So I'll back up a little bit before I get into the data on this slide. I'll back up a little bit. In the 60s, a gentleman called Harry Markowitz did something mind-blowing, right? For which he got the Nobel Prize in 1989. Harry Markowitz passed away earlier this year, but he revolutionized finance. How did he revolutionize finance? What Markowitz ji said? Markowitz ji said that if you diversify your wealth across two assets with low correlation. So let's keep it simple. Assume the American market is generating say 13% dollar return in the long term. Indian market is generating 11% dollar return in the long term. America 13, India 11. If you diversify, say, equally across the two markets, right? What Markowitz said, and this was the first ever, and it was a mind-blowing finding. He said, if you diversify across two low correlation markets, your compounding will be the higher of the two markets. So if America is compounding at 13 and India is compounding at 11, you will compound not at 11 or 12, you'll compound at 13, right? So 50-50 kar rahe ho aap, half of your wealth in America, half in India, you'll get the higher return of the two markets. And not only that, your risk will be like that of the lower market, right? Mind-blowing finding in finance. Now, there's some maths behind it. I'll use a real life example, and then we'll get into the maths behind it. And I promise I won't bore everybody with Nobel Prize wala maths. So let's use the practical example. So on the screen, I've given you real data, right? So last 20 years ka rupee return, sorry, last 20 years ka rupee returns from Nifty and S&P I have put there. Nifty is 14.4. These are rupee returns. Nifty is 14.4. S&P is 13.2. And in this simulation, I'm doing 50-50 every year. And I've taken a random date, folks. I've taken 1st January. You can take whatever date suits you. I'm saying every 1st January, I'll put adha my wealth, half my wealth in Nifty and half my wealth in S&P 500. And you can see, right, Harry Markowitz is right. Even though I'm doing 50-50, the return is the higher of the two markets, right? That's the first finding. God, long live Harry Markowitz. Second finding, right? India ka market ka, we call it standard deviation. Basically, how much does the market zigzag? India is 21.1. America is 13.5. No surprises there. India is an emerging market. We zigzag more than America, right? By doing 50-50, we don't get an average. We don't get a 17-18. We get similar to the American number. So your return is the higher of the two markets. Your risk is the lower of the two markets, right? And the same thing applies to downside risk. Downside risk, हमारे profession में, how much does a portfolio fall? What is the maximum fall in 20 years, right? So maximum fall in 20 years, right? In a given 12-month period, America is 9.8, Nifty is 15.5, average pay 10.8. And similarly for risk adjusted return, matlab return divided by risk, right? So Harry Markowitz rightfully got the Nobel Prize for this. Now, this is what we call the free lunch in finance. If you just did Nifty by itself, over 20 years, you would have got 14.4 with a volatility of 21.1, right? So आपका risk adjusted return केवल 0.69 होता है. Risk adjusted return is very simple. 14.4 divided by 21.1. That's केवल 0.69. All I had to do was do 50-50 India and America. And voila, your risk adjusted return is 1. Right? आपका return उतना ही है जितना निफ्टी का है. You're getting the same return as the Nifty. But आपकी volatility पूरी तोड़ दी गई है. Your volatility is similar to America. You get Indian returns with American volatility. You get superior risk-adjusted return and without any extra kharcha. This is the free lunch in finance. If you diversify across assets with low correlation, your returns are not compromised. Right? So those of you listening, if you've done exceedingly well in India in the last 5 years, as I suspect you must have, if you diversify into global equities, your returns will not get compromised, folks. If you diversify into global equities, your returns are not going to get compromised. Your risk will come down. आपको रात को बेहतर नींद आएगी.
So you obviously have an affinity towards sleep because you keep talking about रात को बेहतर नींद आएगी. But
Yeah,
I think this is fabulous stuff, and I don't think we would have seen this in this much of clarity, that you can actually generate India-like returns, which is significantly lower, carrying a significantly lower risk in the portfolio. So very, 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 very interesting perspective. When you look at global investing, especially when you look at US, I
हाँ
think
जी.
three things really come out. Sort of one, of course, is this entire thing about interest rates in the US. Second is something that you, of course, have spoken about sometime when we spoke as well about de-dollarization. So are we really achieving that? Is that a element that should play out? And finally, of course, global uncertainties and sentiments. How do you see these three elements playing out? What is your take on them?
ठीक, I'll take them one by one because काफी heavy duty सवाल है आपका ये. So let's start with interest rates, right? So all of last year, right, by all of calendar last year, calendar 2024, American Central Bank, the Federal Reserve was cutting rates left, right, and center, right? वो काटे जा रहा था, right? But then this year, 2025, 2025, they changed tack. They said the American economy is in healthy shape, in spite of all of Trump's tweets. In spite of Trump's tweets, the Fed said that look, the American economy is in great shape. We don't need to cut further, right? Now, a lot of people in India were skeptical about this, but I'll show you some data. Those who are interested, we can show plenty more. I agree with the Fed. The American economy is in spectacular shape, right? So this is job creation. This is job creation data. So just for context, I've pasted the US job creation data for the Lehman Wala period. So the 2 years going into the great financial crisis, I've pasted the job creation data. You can see it's pretty pathetic, right? Going into the GFC, the job creation data is pretty pathetic. Obviously, once Bear Stearns and Lehman blew up, the job creation data became negative. In contrast, today in America, राइट? अमेरिका इज chugging out 2 lakh jobs every month. हर महीने 2 लाख जॉब क्रिएट कर रहा है अमेरिका, राइट? एंड आई फोक्स आई कैन प्रैक्टिकली टेस्टिफाई टू दिस. आई गो टू अमेरिका ऑन वर्क एवरी 4-5 months, राइट? वहाँ पे ट्रक ड्राइवर नहीं मिलता, टैक्सी ड्राइवर नहीं मिलता, होटल में खाना बनाने के लिए लोग नहीं मिलते, क्लीनर नहीं मिलता. एपिक लेबर शॉर्टेज इन अमेरिका, राइट? इट्स पैराडॉक्सिकल. ट्रम्प इज डूइंग ऑल दिस नाराबाजी एंड मोस्ट ऑफ अस देयरफॉर आर लुकिंग थ्रू ट्रम्प का, we're looking through Trump ka tweets, because we can see the American labor market is in excellent shape. Similarly, if a labor market is tight, what do you expect? You expect to see strong wage growth, right? So if you adjust for the COVID blip, right? You adjust for the COVID blip where naturally, as we came out of COVID, there was first wage surge and then wage deflation. Wage growth in America is running at very healthy levels, right? Adjusted for inflation, after inflation, American real wages are growing at around 2%, which is what they have done in the past, right? So tight labor market, naturally, therefore, real wages growing at 2%, which is a very healthy number. 2% wage growth after inflation is a healthy number. And then furthermore, if you look at household debt, right? Household debt, we are in fact, India is now a far more indebted country when it comes to household debt than America. Household debt in America has reached a post-Lehman low, right? Their government debt is high, but more practical, more relevant for you and me is American household debt, right? More relevant for the Fed is household debt. Household balance sheets are in excellent shape, and so are corporate balance sheets, right? S&P 500, अमेरिकन कंपनीज बैलेंस शीट्स आर इन एक्सीलेंट शेप, राइट? जस्ट उनका सॉवरेन ने बहुत सारा पैसा लिया है, सरकार ने पैसा लिया है. इंडिया में उल्टा है. इंडिया में हाउस होल्ड डेट आर इन द वर्स्ट शेप एवर. We have become one of the most indebted middle classes in the world. Now, coming back to therefore to the Fed, my reading is there's no really ground, there are no grounds for the Fed to cut further. Economy is in excellent shape, contrary to the न्यूज़पेपर हेडलाइंस, राइट? अब आते हैं आपके सवाल पे, डी डॉलराइजेशन पे, राइट? ये इंडिया में काफी कॉफी शॉप्स पे चर्चा होती रहती है, चाय पे चर्चा होती रहती है कि बॉस डी डॉलराइजेशन तो आने वाला है. ठीक है, सो दिस इज अ कॉम्प्लेक्स सब्जेक्ट. आई ट्राई माय बेस्ट टू सॉर्ट ऑफ सिंप्लीफाई इट एंड शेयर वॉट एवर आई अंडरस्टैंड दिस सब्जेक्ट टू बी. ठीक है, पहले स्टार्ट करते हैं बाय व्हाई डज द वर्ल्ड ऑलवेज हैव अ सिंगल करेंसी फॉर ट्रेडिंग, राइट? वेदर इट्स टुडे और 100 years ago, ग्लोबल इकोनॉमी में हमेशा there's one currency which is used as a default for trading. Why is that? Because of something called the double coincidence of wants. Right? So simple case study लेते हैं. Think of a tea exporter from India to say Tanzania. Right? Tanzania में भी लोग चाय पीते होंगे. So if a tea exporter from India sells Darjeeling tea to Tanzania, will they really squabble with each other on will the trade be in Indian rupees or the Tanzanian shilling? I don't think so. I don't think they'll spend time saying यार किसके करेंसी में ट्रेड करेंगे. They will trade in the dollar, right? Because it's a simple default currency to trade in, rather than having on haggling on every trade कि Indian rupee होगा या Tanzanian shilling होगा, right? So what a single currency does, right? And the reason the world always has a single currency for trading is it solves the double coincidence of wants. We don't have to argue with each other किस currency में trade होगी, right? Today that currency is the dollar. 85% of the world's trade is still in the dollar. Local regional currencies really don't matter so much. 85% trade अभी भी डॉलर में होती है. Now, a century ago, that currency wasn't the dollar. It was the pound sterling, right? Why did the pound sterling get dismantled and removed as the main currency? Because Adolf Hitler pounded Britain into dust in 1940, right? Adolf Hitler pounded Britain into dust. So where I'm sitting in England, इसके पास ही एक one of the bombs of Hitler's Luftwaffe fell. Thankfully, the bomb didn't explode, right? अभी भी जमीन में गड्ढा बना हुआ है वहां पे, right? So Adolf Hitler pounded Britain into dust in 1940. That's the point at which the world switched from GBP to USD, right? Now, if you are watching this and you say de-dollarization hoga, you'll have to then convince me that America is going to lose some major war in the next decade, right? You might be able to convince me, but pending such proof, my reading is the dollar prevails. Now, let's assume that you're right, that the America will have a major reversal at some stage in the next decade. Suppose America has a major reversal. What will be the single currency that we will trade in globally? Remember, we need a currency to trade in globally. We can't have Indians and Tanzanians arguing on chota trades like a bag of tea. सो कौन सी करेंसी होगी? आरएमबी में करेंगे हम लोग ट्रेड, राइट? आई डोंट थिंक सो. आई कांट सी द इंडियन गवर्नमेंट सेइंग चलो भैया लोग आरएमबी में ट्रेड चालू कर दो. नॉर कैन आई सी द अमेरिकन सेइंग लेट्स ट्रेड इन द आरएमबी, राइट? सो आरएमबी अनलाइकली. प्लस द स्मॉल पॉइंट, अमेरिका चाइना हैज कैपिटल कंट्रोल्स. सो यू कांट हैव कैपिटल कंट्रोल्स ऑन करेंसी एंड से हमारी करेंसी में आप ट्रेड करो, राइट? So then will it be the euro, right? Euro में खुद तो अपने बीच में agree कर नहीं पाते क्या करना है. I doubt the euro becomes the default currency. तो RMB भी नहीं होगी, euro भी नहीं होगी, तो कौन सा होगा, right? I don't think the rupee is at a point where the rupee will take over, right? So I think it's pointless to sort of try to think of options. There's a final problem. Any country that aspires to be the world's trading currency, काफी लोगों को इच्छा है कि हमारी करेंसी दुनिया की ट्रेडिंग करेंसी होगी. there's a economic benefit called seigniorage, वो कभी और डिस्कस करेंगे. Any country that wants to be the world's trading currency, that country has to be ready to run massive current account deficits, because if you don't run current account deficits, the world won't have enough of your currency to trade with each other. Now, I can't see too many countries putting their hand up and saying, Malik, हम current account deficit चलाएंगे, हमारी बारी है, right? America, ironically, in spite of Trump's efforts, remains the world's largest current account deficit. So there's a whole bunch of reasons where it's very easy to sit in a coffee shop or a chai ki dukan and over chai and bun maska speculate about de-dollarization, but practical level pe the argument falls away, right? Now let's come to the last bit of what you are saying, right? Which is अगर अमेरिकन इकोनॉमी में इंटरेस्ट रेट नहीं घटेंगे, डॉलर बरकरार रहेगा, व्हाट इज द स्टेट ऑफ द यूएस इकोनॉमी? वहां पे रिसेशन इमिनेंट है क्या? कल के डेट में यूएस इकोनॉमी घुसने वाली है क्या? अगेन आई गो बैक टू माई स्लाइड्स, राइट? आई कैन शो यू प्लेंटी मोर ऑफ दीज स्लाइड्स, but the America that I see when I travel, the America that I see in corporate earnings, is a country where the economy is in really good shape, right? It's paradoxical that news flow adverse hai, because sentiment indicators, I know people are saying iski chinta hai, uski chinta hai, but whether it is job creation, whether it is wage growth, whether it is household leverage, job openings, फिर से मैंने देखिए number of jobs being created, we are at the levels where America was before Lehman, so before, sorry, COVID का naturally there was a sag and then there was a post-COVID revenge wali revival. Job openings are at healthy rates, right? Similarly, high yield bond indices. High yield bond indices are a very good indicator of financial system का stress, right? So अमेरिका में high yield bond index देखिए, लिबरेशन डे पे पीक किया. द ब्लैक लाइन फोक्स, द ब्लैक line is the high yield bond index. The high yield bond index peaked at liberation day. It's coming off nicely, and naturally, as I'm sure those of you are reading newspapers are feeling as well, economic uncertainty is also coming off. So American economy is in good shape, right? And that's obviously translating into earnings growth. We'll come to earnings growth later on. So the arguments are consistent. I don't think the Fed will cut. Why won't the Fed cut? Because American economy is in good shape. Because the American economy is in good shape, I think current account deficits will be punchy in spite of President Trump's protestations, which will mean that the dollar remains the main currency in which the world trades, in spite of all the noise around other currencies trying to kick in.
This is, I mean, very comprehensive. Thanks, and I'm already getting a number of questions on the chat box, but I'll hold myself back and ask you something very relevant, given that you've talked about Trump and tweak and tariffs.
Hmm.
Um, of course, there is a lot of this entire environment of uncertainty. Sort of
Are.
everybody's talking about it, and you said chai pe charcha, but even in chai pe charcha, I think people are talking about Trump and tariff and impact and also give us a bit of a sense of what does it really mean, especially in the India context. Should we be worried, not worried? How do you see this degree of uncertainty? Would it go down in a short while, or is it going to be persistent? What's your sense of all this?
I mean, look, I don't think whether it's Trump or indeed any other politician, I think modern democratic politicians like to create the news cycle. They like to run the news cycle, right? And putting Truth Social or X or whatever it's called these days in their hands is giving them a chance to run the news cycle. So I think the entire Trump era, and I strongly suspect beyond Trump as well and beyond America as well, volatility around political news flow is here to stay, right? I can't imagine any democratic politician, any politician in a democracy. I don't mean democratic in the name of a party. I mean any politician in a modern democracy not using social media and the news cycle to keep his brand strong. What you and I have to do is figure out how much of that noise, how much of that hype is bluster that we can see through and carry on doing investing, and how much of what do we take seriously. तो आपको noise और signal के बीच में distinguish करना पड़ेगा, right? And that's where I thought April was tremendous. Yeah, I think the man created huge hype around 2nd April and Liberation Day, right? तो थोड़ी सी मेरी भी मेरी I also got nervous around Liberation Day. इतना आवाज किया. But by around 15th April, I was damn happy. Why was I happy? Because I said this guy to always chickens out. So he announces something, he announced crazy tariffs on Liberation Day. And then within 15 days, he blinked thrice, right? There were 24-hour periods where he blinked twice, right? So I said, I'm no great White House expert, but I can sit there and say, first you announce, then you retract, then you say 90 days ke liye suspended. I can broadly figure out the pattern. So it's called TACO, by the way. The technical term is TACO. इसके लिए Nobel Prize नहीं मिलेगा because all it means is Trump always chickens out. Taco के लिए Nobel Prize नहीं मिलेगा. Trump always chickens out. So it's not just investors like me, right? A whole bunch of Indian CEOs are Indian portfolio company CEOs. They've also figured out Taco. So they don't when an American politician says we're going to have a really great trade deal with India, I don't see Indian CEOs saying tomorrow morning हम FDI शुरू कर देंगे US में because they're saying this is also part of Taco, right? So our job is to then say that if tariff uncertainty, if the whole taco phenomenon is now well known, 2nd April has come and gone. Every week, America is walking back, and Trump is walking back on the whole adverse tariff regime. The underlying macro signals in America are strong. Underlying economy is strong. America remains the tech hegemon of the world. What should I do? The answer to me, right, and we'll go into some slides later on in the session. The answer to me is I should double down on US small and mid cap, right? Because अगर टाको है वो noise है, Trump and tariffs are bluster and noise, and he's walking back very quickly on every promise of reprisals. The economy in America is in good shape. US small and mid caps are their heaviest discount in 20 years to large caps. तो भैया मौका तो वहां पे दिख रहा है US small and mid caps में. We'll get into earnings and specifics later on. But I think that's how we are interpreting it, right? If 2nd April had been followed through by 25% tariffs and no, not 25%, the tariffs, I think 50, 100, 125, whatever the crazy numbers were, had global trade broken down, had the American job creation numbers fallen off a cliff, I would have been more worried, but none of that is happening. All that's happening is relentless avaz, noise, right? And all you're gonna have to do is put some earbuds, look through the noise, and invest sensibly.
Thanks, Mr. I'm getting a host of questions, but I'm holding them back
Hmm.
till we finish off what we have in the agenda, and then we'll come to the questions. You talked about how US economy is in a good position. You
Mhm.
talked about how the uncertainty got triggered by Trump, but clearly it is not something that is getting sustained over a period of time. There are reversals to statements, not even policies for that matter, and that is of course giving a positive vibe back to the market. Um, and the US markets, of course, appear to be back in a positive territory. There is should there be any further concerns or distractions from the noises that we are still seeing, or should we feel comfortable saying that at least the US market seems to have discounted what is happening, all the noise that is happening around it?
So look, I think it's difficult to foresee the future, right? Having said everything around Taco and so on, I don't quite know, for example, what he'll do about the Israel and Middle Eastern situation. मेरे को honestly नहीं पता है, right? And given that Israel, Middle East, Iran, these are that's where the oil price story originates from. Difficult to know. Is there an adverse oil shock coming for the world? But more broadly speaking, if you think about the world in totality, usually things like oil shocks, right, end up hitting the Indian market as much as they end up hitting the American market, right? And in fact, they end up hitting India often more because we're a bigger oil importer than America is. And therefore, I think what I would like to sort of pivot to is saying that I can't foresee the future. क्या oil shock आएगा या मिडिल ईस्ट में tensions बढ़ेंगे या यूक्रेन रशिया peace deal होगा और indeed India Pakistan will something happen. I can't foresee the future. What I can see is I can see valuations and earnings growth, right? ये दोनों चीजें दिखती है and they're related to each other. So if I go to the valuations piece, Shoibal, right, and the two are related, valuations and earnings growth are related. Uh, uh, the US market has recovered, as we discussed. Taco is well known. US market has recovered. So headline level पे S&P देखें या Nasdaq देखें, headline level पे S&P and Nasdaq both are trading well above their long-term averages, right? Those colorful blobs are the long-term averages. Headline level पे S&P, Nasdaq दोनों long-term averages से आगे हैं. Another way to think about the fact that the market is seeing through Trump's bluster. But If you take out the top 10 stocks in S&P and the top 10 stocks in Nasdaq, the top 10 stocks account for around 50-55% of the market cap, right? This is the magnificent 7 or now the magnificent 10. If you take out the top 10 stocks in S&P and Nasdaq, these are the tech giants. If you take them out, you realize that valuations in America are actually super reasonable, right? Two ways to see this. Firstly, we do this thing called the S&P equal weighted. So अगर आप 500 के 500 स्टॉक्स को इक्वल वेट देते हो, यू डी एम्फसाइज द टॉप 10 एंड यू रियलाइज द S&P equal weighted is trading more or less in line with its long-term averages. And another way to do it is to look at S&P mid cap, which doesn't have any of the large cap names in it. वहां पे भी valuations are pretty reasonable, right? In contrast, in India, Nifty is at 20 times. Small BSE small cap is at even scarier multiples, and both Nifty and BSE small cap are well ahead of the long-term averages. Now, it's one thing for a market to be expensive compared to long-term averages, right? But there's a further wrinkle to the story. Look at earnings growth in America, right? I've given you 10, 20, 15, 20 years, right? Effectively, earnings growth in America, right? If I take, so let's take S&P mid cap. S&P mid cap is effectively growing earnings at around 10% dollar terms, right? अभी भी हो रहा है. Even in the current year, S&P mid cap earnings growth is 10% dollar terms. It's nearly twice the earnings growth of India, right? And that's where I think I feel very jittery about the domestic market in India. This is the reason why. This is the reason why I've switched out over the last couple of years. I've switched out 40% of my personal wealth out of India into the developed market, small and mid caps, because the earnings growth piece in India has come off very sharply in the last 5-6 quarters. The valuations haven't, right? Whereas in the Western world, and using S&P mid cap as an example, earnings growth is almost 2x that of India, and valuations are actually cheaper. So if you put it on a PEG basis, right, to bring the growth into the picture, right? So go to S&P equal weighted 17 times, S&P mid cap 16 times, divided by earnings growth on a PEG basis, S&P mid cap is less than half the multiple of India. 0.8 पे S&P mid cap है, 1.8 पे Nifty 50 है, right? So challenge in India is not just that the headline multiple looks elevated by long-term averages, right? The challenge in India is that earnings growth has come off very sharply in the last 6-7 months. And on a separate webinar, if you guys are interested, I'll show you the data. What we are living through in India is the steepest earnings slowdown outside the GFC and outside COVID, right? And it's a free market economy. हमारा देश America free market economy. So India will recover from this earnings slowdown, but it'll take a while. And I suspect before that earnings recovery kicks in, we will see a pullback in India. In American mid caps case, compared to underlying earnings growth, which is pretty robust, valuations are extremely affordable. Effectively, American mid cap, I'm using American mid cap as a proxy for developed markets mid cap, is trading at a 60% discount to Indian large caps. American mid caps are trading at a 60% discount to Indian large caps. I'm not going to make the comparison to Indian small caps because that's a number that is going to be even bigger, and it might provoke some people in this call to get little worked up.
Interesting. I mean, at this stage, I think I'm compelled to ask one question that comes in from one of our audience here, and I'll read the question out for you, Saurabh. It says, encouraging to hear US and India have a very low correlation. I think, and that's a point you're really making from the beginning of this conversation. It says, can you share examples of where the correlation with India is higher?
No.
And how does Euro GBP investing correlate vis-a-vis India? So we're talking about dollars, but how about other currencies playing out here?
अरे यार, the GBP तो will be दिल की बात आपने छेड़ दी मेरे. I grew up in the UK. We'll come to Euro GBP, but let me give you a few examples of how this diversification thing works. I'll choose some episodes where the two countries, India and America, were diversified, and we'll also discuss some episodes where they were not diversified. I don't know. So usually in India, right, because उनका political cycle, हमारा election cycle India America fundamentally अलग है, financial cycle अलग है, structure the economy is different, right? So when, for example, we went through the ILFS crisis in India, ILFS crisis was ILFS, DHFL, Yes Bank, ये सारा roughly same time पे there was a crisis in autumn of 2018. For obvious reasons, the Indian benchmark fell 10% and the S&P had no reason to fall, right? Why will the S&P fall just because the housing finance is suffering, right? Similarly, Demon ke time, Nifty fell, but no reason for America to fall. Instead, America was actually rallying strongly. But the reverse happened. Reverse happened when the Russia-Ukraine war took place in 2022, right? S&P fell 10%, but the Nifty held firm, right? And the first trade war with China in 2018, that was Trump's kind of entry into the trade war combat. S&P fell 13% and Nifty held up, right? This is basically the classical diversification that I'm talking about. वो भी पिटते हैं, हम भी पिटते हैं, but अलग अलग टाइम पे पिटते हैं, and therefore if you diversify roughly half and half, you'll get a smoother compounding story. However, there is an exception to this, which is mega crises, right? जहाँ पे दुनिया हिल जाती है. So mega crises you can see here are COVID and COVID and Lehman Brothers, COVID and GFC, दोनों कंट्री पिटे, right? But इसमें भी एक further story है, right? Mega crisis में. So let me give you the mega crisis story, right? So here's the two mega crises of my investing career. Let's start with COVID, right? Both markets fell 20-30%, but you can see that the S&P recovered in half the time of the Nifty, right? So देखिए S&P 109 दिन में 109 days, the S&P recovered. The Nifty took more than twice as long. But the reverse happened during GFC. For obvious reasons, America got really pounded by GFC. So they took 600 days to recover. We recovered in half the time, right? So the moral of the story that I take away is in mega crises, COVID, GFC, sometimes they will recover twice as fast as us. America will. Sometimes we will recover twice as fast as them. And therefore, the point is not to say कौन बेहतर है. कोई रेस नहीं चल रही यहाँ पे. The point is not to say whether America is better or India is better. The point is to diversify across both markets. The smart investor doesn't try to win some race here, nationalistic race. The smart investor says, yeah, why don't I avail of both of these markets and compound my wealth at a solid rate, same rate as I compounded in India, but get smoother compounding and thus have more peace of mind, better sleep at night.
Interesting. I mean that's really well put. And you're talking to me about the euro and GBP
Mm.
perspective.
So let's come back to Euro GPP. Thanks for reminding me. So let's focus on the Eurozone, right? There are certain things America leads the world. Now, we obviously know the tech story, right? But there are certain things in which Europeans are unmatched, right? Specifically ultra luxury, right? So the French and the Italians are very good at figuring out ultra luxury. So let me just explain to you what ultra luxury means. So roughly after the Second World War, great wealth started being created in Europe and America, right? So 50s, 60s, में बहुत पैसा बना. So a whole generation of dollar billionaires was born, right? Roughly the count of dollar billionaires has been growing at 7% now for 40, 50 years, right? खूब पैसा बना है West में, especially the 50s, 60s, 50s and 60s. So the French and the Italians, right? Smart people, they realize the dollar billionaire has one big problem in life, which is that he wants to tell other people he's rich, he's made it, but he can't because it looks vulgar, right? So they created a whole class of companies, the French and the Italians did. The class of companies solved a specific use case, which is you want to signal wealth and status, but you don't want to look vulgar, right? So ultra luxury is a unique industry where only the French and the Italians can do it. The Americans, I don't tell them this, they might feel hurt, but the Americans can't do ultra luxury, right? वो आईफोन बना लेते हैं, but वहीं पे उनकी रुक जाती है, right? So there are specific things that Europeans can do that we've got in our global portfolio because they are unique in that regard, right? On the coming to the UK, the country where I spent 17 years, there's a few less things that they can do that others can't do, right? They can still play Test cricket reasonably well in England, but jokes apart, in something called support service. Support services are providing infrastructure for road projects, power projects, construction projects, right? Providing JCBs, earth movers, floodlights, the power drills for construction projects. They have some world-class companies. We invested a few years ago in one, right? And generally, the city of London and design, fashion, and music is an area where the British excel. I think they're hoping to revive their fortunes in the years to come. But Europe, more than UK, is a place where you can find useful trades. So if I look at our own investing pattern, right, roughly 65% will be America, 5-10% is Canada, of our portfolio, 65% America, 5-10% Canada. Canada also has some fabulous tech companies. And then around 25% will be continental Europe, around 2-3% will be UK, 2-3% will be the Far East.
So while it may look that these are all separate economies, absolutely disparate from each other, but actually there is a connection which drives all of these together. So wealth getting created in US has a deep connection with ultra luxury in Europe, and in some manner some elements within UK as well. I think that's the
Absolutely. And
broad
anyway,
connect.
that's what we're trying to do here, right? It is a connected world in spite of
Right, right.
the best efforts of certain people. It is a connected world. And broadly speaking, there are three mega themes that you and I can make money in this connected world. Pehla theme is we call them neutral arms dealer. Neutral arms dealer है महाभारत में और कुरुक्षेत्र में don't back the Kauravas or the Pandavas, back the fellow who's selling the gada, the talwar, right? Because there will be a dude who will be selling gada and talwar at Kurukshetra. You just have to find him, right? So in the case of my phone, right, the dude selling the neutral arms dealer is TSMC. TSMC's chip goes into Android phones, goes into iPhones, right? If in case I can't figure out कौन जीतेगा, Samsung या Apple, I buy TSMC because TSMC पे the laptop on which I'm doing this call with you, uska chip bhi TSMC ne banaya, right? That's the first big theme, neutral arms dealers, right? Second theme is utilities, right? Things that the world needs to use every day, right? So we're doing this call on Zoom. So part of the world needs Zoom every day, but the whole world needs Microsoft every day because uske bina, without Microsoft, दुकान ही नहीं खुलती. And from software alone, Microsoft makes 110 billion. They store those files on cloud. They make another 110 billion, right? And it's repetitive, right? It doesn't matter what Trump says tomorrow or what Iran does this evening. We will
Right.
need Microsoft Office. That's a utility, repetitive use. आपको हर रोज चाहिए. And third theme, as we discussed, is ultra luxury. The count of rich people, ultra rich people, is growing at 7%. They all want to signal status, power, and wealth. And companies that help them do that is the third class of things. And these are all interconnected stories. And these are not stories that you and I can access in the Indian market, right? Indian market में थोड़े से neutral arms dealers हैं and कुछ utilities हैं, but हमारे utilities tend to be बिजली सड़क पानी type,
Correct.
not Microsoft type.
Interesting, sort of. And since we've been speaking about international investment, and I think at the beginning of this conversation we spoke about gift. My next question, of course,
Hmm.
is your choice of Gift City. So I think what did play in your mind when you looked at Gift City to sort of launch a global product from, and how do you think is this jurisdiction important from an India context, especially from a context of investment stroke wealth management point of view?
Yeah, so I think as I said earlier in the call, right, lot of credit, right? I've been visiting Gift City now for 4 years, right? I've seen it when it was nothing, and I see it today where it's becoming a burgeoning financial center. And hats off to those guys, right? And I mean this in all sincerity. Hats off to those guys for having the vision to realize that affluent Indians will want to diversify. Why should they diversify through Dubai or Singapore? Why not create an international financial center in India itself, in Gujarat, right? And then within that construct, they helped people like us. I think we were one of the first asset management companies, Shoibal, one of the first asset management companies to set up shop there. They help people like us understand that there is a low cost, user friendly, investor friendly regulatory regime which allows people like us to invest all across the world sitting in our offices in Gift City, right? It's not easy to do, to build something like this in what was at that time a financial backwater, right? 4 saal pehle Gandhinagar was a financial backwater. Gift was just a little bit of zameen in the middle of the countryside. It's not easy to pull this off. In 4 years, they made enormous progress. And my reading is the next 10 years, I think the next 10 years really is about Indians going global and diversifying globally. Last 10 years was Indians losing their love for buying physical assets and discovering financial assets, specifically Indian equities. I think the next 10 years will be Indians saying, Chalo, Indian equities mein kama liya, let's diversify globally. And GIFT will be the bridge to do that, and to do that in a cost efficient, user investor friendly manner.
Great, super. And since we are talking about gift, I have a question which I'll answer.
Hmm.
It says, can we invest in global mutual funds through Gift City? The answer is yes. You can. There are a range of global investing opportunities available through Gift City. So please, if you're interested, do drop me a message or reach out to your RM if you're a HSBC customer. Otherwise, happy to reach out to you, drop an email to us, and we'll be happy to answer. There's another question which talks about what instruments does HSBC offer to explore this duality scenario. I think HSBC offers a range of products from Gift City, including the one that we are here to talk to sort of about. It basically offers products which enables you to invest into global markets through products which are registered out of Gift City. So if you are an investor which is looking forward towards diversification, we are really the partners that you'll work with. We also offer products for non-resident Indians to invest back into India. They're dollar-denominated products which are registered out of Gift City. And often some of you who are non-resident Indians may choose to use products like that. So we offer both sides. You can, as an Indian, invest abroad, and as a non-resident Indian, invest back into India through products listed in Gift City. Like I said, please do reach out to us, and we shall be happy to answer your questions. I have an interesting. I think somebody who's a follower of Markowitz has put up a question. So it says the numbers on the Markowitz slide are in their respective currencies, or was the USD INR impact considered in the analysis?
Right. So the whoever is asking the question is a very perceptive man. The numbers were in dollars. Sorry, the one numbers were both in INR. I beam up the slide again. The numbers were both in INR, and whoever is asking the question has intuited something pretty powerful, which is, let's first wait for the slide to come up. Yeah. So these are INR numbers, folks. And the reason we did it in INR is typically when the Indian market suffers, no, जब निफ्टी की पिटाई होती है, जब निफ्टी की पिटाई होती है, the rupee comes under pressure, right? For obvious reasons. If there's something happening to the Nifty, presumably the economy is weak, presumably the RBI is cutting rates. If the RBI is cutting rates, the rupee will devalue, foreign investors will be selling, rupee will devalue, etc. So what happens is if you have a dollar portfolio at that time, right? अगर आपके पास डॉलर पोर्टफोलियो है या S&P 500 है, in rupee terms, your dollar portfolio holds up even better. In rupee terms, your dollar portfolio holds up even better. So building a global portfolio, diversifying out of India works well, especially since when we have bear markets in India, the Indian currency comes under pressure, right? So these are all rupee numbers, and kudos to whoever intuited this. You benefit from global diversification because the rupee comes under pressure when there is a bear market in India.
Super perspective. I'll move to US stocks back again. I think when we were also talking at our office, you're talking about manufacturing in the US, and I think some of the conversations at this point in time, especially where policy seems to be driving manufacturing back into US, right? So a bit of your perspective on the manufacturing sector, especially mid and small cap, because a lot of conversations happening saying I think mid and small cap sectors in US would be the first beneficiaries if manufacturing was to get onshored again into US.
So I think we need to understand that US politicians want manufacturing to go back into America. But US manufacturers do not want manufacturing to go back into America because they realize that America में manufacturing करना बहुत मुश्किल है, महंगा है, लोग ही नहीं मिलेंगे, right? So again Taco remember Taco and look through the political bluster, folks. So let's take a simple example. Let's take the example of Apple. ठीक है? Apple employs 100,000 people, roughly. Foxconn employs 1 million people. Now, many of them in India, in Bangalore, in Chennai. Chennai में Honai का factory है. Red Honai का factory है. So Foxconn employs 10 times as many people as Apple. ठीक है? Foxconn's market cap is 50 billion. Apple's market cap is 4 trillion. So Apple employs 1/10 the number of people as Foxconn. Apple employs 1/10 the number of people as Foxconn. Apple makes 70x the value that Foxconn makes. Why? Because Apple is not trying to employ people. उसको कोई इच्छा नहीं है. Apple is doing clever things, दिमाग वाला things, intellectual property वाला things. Apple is saying we want to focus on the highest level of the value chain, जहाँ पे इंसान का दिमाग को ROI मिले. Foxconn for good reason, Terry Gu for good reason is saying मैं मैन्युफैक्चरिंग संभाल लेता हूँ मालिक, चाइना में हो, इंडिया में हो, ताइवान में हो, जहाँ पे भी हो. He's doing the manufacturing piece, right? So American manufacturers is something that we invest in, right? There's not just Apple used to be part of the portfolio 2 months before the great Warren Buffett. We exited it because of valuation reasons. We've invested in a whole range of American manufacturing companies. They are growing earnings at a good rate, but much of the manufacturing is taking place outside America because it's cheaper to do that, right? And even when I speak to Indian companies, they say we want to sell to America, but we don't want to make over there. And why don't you want to make over there? There's nothing wrong about it. American labor market is full up. Banda ही नहीं मिलता, कोई नहीं मिलता. If anybody watching wants to join me on one of my American trips, you're most welcome. I'll show you that if you land after 7 p.m. in one of the state capitals, the second tier state capital, right? Chota state capital, says Kansas City, Des Moines, Iowa. 7 बजे के बाद आप land करो, you'll find it hard to get an Uber taxi. You'll find it hard to get any taxi because there are no taxi drivers. Why? Because they're driving trucks, because truck drivers are getting paid $2 lakh a year. Why are truck drivers getting $2 lakh a year? Because that's what you need to pay to get a truck driver. And then when you drive with me to my 3 star, 4 star hotel, you'll realize there's no chef to cook any food because there's just nobody available to cook any food, right? So we are focusing on American manufacturing companies, but that doesn't make them make in America. They make elsewhere in the world, but what they do is they drive design, right? So let's take an even more practical example, right? So one of our portfolio companies makes 90% of the world's seat belts, right? So seat belts for planes, right? So seat belts for airlines. So it's called Transdyne. So Transdyne is the world leader in seat belts, right? It's very difficult for someone else to displace Transdyne because there are elaborate procedures that the US aviation authorities have set up for a seat belt to get signed off and authorized then and enabled to be used by Boeing and Airbus and so on, right? Now Transdyne is headquartered in America. It's an American company, but much of the manufacturing takes place in Asia. So we are investing into America, into American manufacturing companies, but that doesn't mean they make in America. They often make elsewhere in the world. And long may that continue. And my submission to those who believe that kuch badalne wala hai, I doubt anything's going to change on that front, in spite of the protestations of powerful people.
Super. Great. Interesting stuff. So, back to Gift, talk to us a bit about what have you put together in Gift from a whole Marcellus point of view, why Gift? And then, of course, the Global Compounders Fund. Talk to us a bit about what this fund is really about.
Sure. So I'll tell you what I can, subject to our compliance restrictions. We face more compliance restrictions than I can even actually fully remember. But here is what I can say. So we started this journey, as I said, 4 years ago. It was driven by personal need initially. I needed to save. I needed to save in dollars for my children's education abroad, plus my wife and I holiday abroad, plus my parents live abroad. So I needed to save. I needed to save in dollars. It had to be low cost, but it had to also compound at a decent clip, right? Comparable to India, ideally even better than India. And I tried it on my own. I went to London, went to New York. I called up global fund managers, and it didn't work out. They were either asking for $1 million a year, which I couldn't give because of LRS, or they were charging very high fees. So, so we then discussed this internally. We thought first principles. We reached out to friends in the global investment community, and we're very, very fortunate to be able to hire top class people with decades of global investing experience. One measure of India's resurgence is that these folks were willing to relocate, right? And specifically, my colleague Arindam Mandal relocated from New York to to actually not Mumbai. You'll enjoy this. He relocated to Bangalore. He's actually not very far from the branch you're seated in, right? So Arindam relocated from America and brought with him a decade plus of investing for a large mutual fund in America. He bought that. And then Javid Sethi, who was head of research at India's largest family office and had considerable global investing experience there. Javid Sethi joined us as the head of research. And then we went to Gift. We initially got a portfolio management services license where I invested and friends and family invested, and we got going. And then we realized in due course that if we want to make this more tax efficient, which we wanted to make it, we want to make this more tax efficient, more user friendly, create digital sign up processes so that no paper is required. Then we needed to transition to an AIF. So we transitioned to an AIF, I think 5 months ago. And since then, the sign up process has become digital. LRS monies now can be digitally transferred, I think both at the HSBC level and at the Marcellus level. And courtesy the India stack, right? Imagine the irony of this. Courtesy the India stack, we can do global investing with digital signups. Right. So that's what we do. We're offering both the PMS and the AIF platform. My submission to those watching is the AIF is more tax friendly, but courtesy of regulatory restrictions, I can't talk more than that about exactly what we do.
Sure. Saurabh, and since we spoke about gift, couple of interesting questions coming often about gift. One says that you had mentioned about Gift City. Does one need to open a new account there? The answer to that question is yes, you should most definitely look at opening a new account with HSBC in Gift City. If you are an HSBC India customer, you can open that account very, very seamlessly. Do reach out to us. We shall be very, very happy to help. Some insights into this would be welcome. Are there any lock-ins and minimum investment amounts? Yes. At this point in time, all products in Gift City are under the alternate investment fund platform, and there are, of course, minimum threshold amounts. But all of this is evolving very, very quickly. Like I keep mentioning, you must reach out and talk to us so for us to really give you the many, many different options available in Gift. And we shall be happy to help you now and going forward. I think there's one more question which says, do we need to hold a demat account to invest in such global funds? The answer is no. You don't need to necessarily have a demat account to invest in global funds. It's a much simpler process. Do reach out to our branch. Do direct message us, and we shall be happy to guide you on how you can achieve your global diversification goals. Sort of. We obviously have had a very engaging conversation both on US markets, diversification, de-dollarization. Obviously, the theory that backs the idea of diversification in the first place. Also about some of the policy uncertainty given by political developments, especially in the US. Is there something that you believe we've missed? And you think that is going to be something that we must talk about as to our investors and to all the audience that is watching this evening.
So I think let me dwell on a couple of dimensions, right? So for obvious reasons and perhaps good reasons, Shoibal, there's been plenty of hype around the Indian stock market over the last 4 or 5 years, right? And a lot of us end up losing sense of perspective courtesy the levels of hype in India. We forget that India ka GDP is around 3.5 trillion, right? We forget that India ka GDP is 3.5 trillion, and we forget that the American economy is nearly 10x larger than us, right? We will get there one day. We will get there one day. Hopefully, during my children's career, India will catch up with America. Aayega wo din. But at this juncture, we are roughly 1/8 the size of the American economy. Now, what that means is there are colossal opportunities because their economy is 8x our size. There are colossal investment opportunities available for us in India to avail of in America, right? We will one day be their size, but aaj ke date pe, there are colossal investment opportunities. So let me take two examples here. Microsoft alone is as big as the Indian stock market. Microsoft alone is as big as the Indian stock market. Microsoft compounds faster than the Indian stock market. It compounds faster with lower volatility than the Indian stock market, right? That's an example at an epic scale of what America can do for you. But let's look at a different type of opportunity, right? There are business models because their economy is far larger. There are business models available in America operating at large scale, which one day will come to India, but currently are not there. So there's something called less than truckload shipping. So for example, if one day you as HSBC ka bada executive gave me a contract saying fit out all our branches with laptops and monitors, right? If I was in America, I would hire a company called Old Dominion Freight Line, ODFL. What ODFL does is less than truckload trucking, and they built hub and spoke. So rather than Saurabh having to use one truck to send stuff from Mumbai, say Mumbai mein JNPT to HSBC branch in Bangalore, I will use a hub and spoke approach, ODFL. That's what ODFL does. In our country, we have point to point trucking. One day we will get to ODFL style, less than truckload trucking with a hub and spoke system. Now, how much money does this make? ODFL is a $40 billion compounding machine. It's compounded 250x. ODFL, Old Dominion Freight Line out of North Carolina, has compounded 250x in the last 25 years. It's a compounder on the scale of Alphabet or Adobe or Amazon, right? Massive scale ka compounder hai. And I hadn't even heard about it till my colleagues in the global team told me about it, right? Old Dominion Freight Line, truck sochiye dimag mein, think of a trucking company operating. By the way, the truck drivers own 10% of the company, right? So that's the first thing I want to emphasize, right? Abhi bhi economies mein disparity hai. We might be the world's fourth largest economy, but we are still one eighth, one ninth the size of the largest. दूसरा एस्पेक्ट इज कमिंग बैक टू डाइवर्सिफिकेशन. वो बोलने में तो बहुत मजा आता है that diversify कीजिए, Markowitz, and I show some slides and so on. But let's also apply some common sense here. Suppose you wanted to diversify. You said that, look, boss, मैंने इंडिया में हूँ, I want to diversify. Markowitz makes sense to me. रात को चैन की नींद चाहिए. I want to compound at a good rate, but I want my volatility to go down. When should you diversify out of India? When Indian market is pounded or when Indian market is roaring? राइट. आई थिंक मेरे लिए आंसर सिंपल है. जब इंडियन मार्केट रोर कर रहा है, वैल्यूएशंस इन इंडिया एट पंची लेवल्स, अर्निंग्स ग्रोथ इज वीक, डाइवर्सिफाई आउट ऑफ इंडिया व्हेन द गोइंग इज गुड इन इंडिया. डोंट वेट फॉर द इंडियन मार्केट टू सफर a 20-30% drawdown and then call up Shoibal, right? Call up Shoibal and his friends at HSBC when your Indian portfolio is rocking, right? Now invert it. When should you invest in Western and American small and mid caps? When they're at all-time highs? Should you invest in American small and mid caps when they're at all-time highs, or should you do that when they're trading at record discounts to large caps, right? So today, American small caps are trading at a record discount to large caps. एक slide दिखा देता हूँ उस पे, right? Today, American small caps, so Russell 2000 is their equivalent of a small cap index. It's trading at a record discount, right? You're trading at a record discount to the S&P 500. The S&P 500 itself has 10 mega caps. The rest of the S&P 500 is pretty reasonably valued, but Russell 2000, which is the small cap index, is trading at a record discount to small caps, right? So the first thing is India se kab diversify karna chahiye when India is rocking. Second thing is US small and mid cap kab lena chahiye when it is under the pump, right? So dono cheeze, you're getting the confluence of factors coming together. And let me end with a quote from the great Warren Buffett, right? And I lived through the quote, so I can give you first hand. So when I graduated from college, I read Buffett ka quote that be greedy when others are fearful, right? Be greedy when others are fearful and be fearful when others are greedy. So to my fearful Bengali mind, right, it made a lot of sense कि बाकी लोग की जब फटी होगी तब मैं जोश दिखाऊंगा, right? So that made a lot of sense to me. So I said, बिल्कुल, I'll do this, boss. So by the age of 25, 26, I loaded up mightily on British stocks, right? Index tracker भी ले लिया, तो stock भी खरीद लिए, right? And then we entered the Lehman wala crash, right? So naturally at that time, going into Lehman, I had a single country portfolio, British portfolio. So naturally the market went down, my portfolio also went down. So I said, boss, Buffett जी ने बोला है that I need to be greedy when others are fearful, but मेरे पास तो पैसे नहीं है. Portfolio मेरी घुस गई है 40-30-40%. And I can't call my dad and say, Dad, give me some money because Buffett ji has told me I need to be greedy when others are fearful. The only way I realized I can be greedy when others are fearful is when part of my portfolio is in India and part is in the Western world. So when India comes under pressure, I pull money from the West, I sell down in the West and come to India. When the West comes under pressure, I sell down in India and go to the West, right? So if you want to do classical Buffett style investing, which many people want to do, then the only way to do Buffett style investing is have two parts to your portfolio which have no correlation with India. Part of it is an Indian portfolio, part of it is a Western portfolio with an American bias. I'll end there, Shoibal. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Brilliant, brilliant. So thank you for giving us this time. It has been a fantastic conversation. We obviously look forward to host you to many other such conversations, and really appreciate the time that you've given us this evening. Thank
Thank
you,
you, sir.
thank you,
Thank you.
and thank you to all our viewers for watching us. You obviously would have this available on YouTube, and we shall share this with you as well. And looking forward to hearing from all of you as well. Thank you, Saurav, and good night. Have a great weekend ahead.
Bye.